Good evening and welcome. According to our clock, it's about 7 p.m. And so in order to be good stewards of your time and ours, we want to go ahead and jump in and get started. Thanks to all of you that are joining us here in-house tonight, and thanks to all of you that are joining us online as well. We appreciate very much your guys taking the time to join us here tonight. So this is kind of how the week will go here in-house. We're going to begin with a meal at 6:30. Thanks to all of those who brought food, and thank you very much for your participation in this evening. And then about 7 o'clock, we'll jump in, and as you see, we have a panel of ministers here that are here to dialogue about these particular issues. And so each evening this week, today through Friday, we will kind of follow this similar pattern. Tonight, we're going to be looking at the question, why am I so anxious? Tomorrow night, we're going to look at why is dealing with money so difficult. Wednesday night, we'll talk about why relationships are so hard. Thursday night, we'll talk about what do I do next, kind of the idea of purpose in life. And then Friday evening, we'll talk about why is dealing with loss so hard. So these are issues that we have had reported to us in the survey that we put out. You may have remembered a few months ago, we started announcing a survey and asking folks to fill that out. And we've also kind of gone back and looked at all the questions that people have sent us just in the various interactions in ministry that we've had. And so these are some of the largest issues that we've had to deal with. So tonight, again, we're looking at the question of why am I so anxious? I'm going to jump in pretty quickly here and ask my fellow ministers here, personally, have you all ever experienced anxiety? Can you give me an example?
Yeah, I think anytime.
Lean into the mic so we make sure we get you there. Yeah. Move that closer to you, the whole thing. Okay? Move the stand over then a little bit as well. So.
I don't know if I'm on. Hopefully I'm on.
Let me make sure it's turned on for you here. It looks like it is. Are we hearing that? He'll get it going.
Test it. There we go. There it is. Yeah. So.
Jump in.
Hey, I think I think back through life and just any kind of big events that's going to come up. Even Sunday, you're going to preach. There's an anxiety there, right? Yep. There's a little bit of anxiousness as you're getting ready for that and anticipating that. So
sometimes that's healthy, though, right? Because it challenges you to get ready.
Okay? Right.
Yeah.
I think I've had the healthy kind of anxiety in my life.
But I've also had one that's kind of, it's hard to put your finger on exactly what it is, but it's like you're going to feel anxious, even if you have a logical explanation and a solution for everything that can solve what you're worried about, and you're still going to feel anxious. And I've experienced that before. It's like I can wrap my head around the solution, and it looks like a good solution and everything's in place, but I'm still almost like I just can't control it, still feeling anxious. I don't know if other folks have experienced that as well. But
yeah, there are a lot of times you're anxious for little things. Maybe you're taking a test, getting ready to take a test. Maybe it's a little bit bigger, getting ready to move. Many of us around here have moved numerous times, especially those who have been in the military. I know for us as chaplains, it's the anxiety of leaving home, going to another location. I know for myself, a few times it was into war zones and wondering how are things going to go there? How will they be? What will my responsibilities be? And not only that, but will my family be taken care of back here? And how will that transpire? So there are the small anxieties and the big anxieties.
Yeah, and basically the research has shown that, and I think we've got we'll put up on the screen here. They report that anxiety is the most common mental health issue that folks are dealing with these days. In fact, 54% of people are struggling with some level of anxiety. One of the researchers was reported to me by Dee Mayer that there was, in between the years of 2013 and 2021, there was reported 110% increase in anxiety among college students. So I think we've got the details on that up there as well. So those are all examples of the fact that anxiety is an issue, and I think some of that, like the report on college students, some of that probably is due to the beginning of the pandemic and the last section of that time frame. But anxiety was there before the pandemic started, and that's only, I think, exacerbated the issue, making it much worse because of that. Now, some folks sometimes have trying to understand what anxiety is. So I'm going to ask you guys, you see a difference between anxiety and worry? And if there's a difference, what is the difference between anxiety and worry?
I think a lot of times worry is a concern. Like, I was a little bit worried on Sunday, but then it went away, right? And that was the end. Whereas anxiety can hold on longer, and it doesn't just go away. So
Okay.
that's how I would describe it.
I would agree with that, but say, anxiety is kind of like those butterflies that you get before a big game if you're into sports. It's also something that can help inspire you, but also protect you from things if you're a little anxious about where you're going, how are we going to make it? It makes you a little more cautious, where the real worry is where you might find that it becomes debilitating and restraining you from really focusing more on how am I going to get through this and being more overwhelmed by it.
Yeah, it's like I've experienced worry. I think it's a little different in that it's more temporary. And I've had periods of my life when things are kind of breaking down where, like, I perpetually feel this anxiety, and it affects my family, it affects my health. I'm not... I feel like I can't think straight ever, and I'm tired all the time because I'm constantly in this state of anxiety. So that's, I'm not saying I'm experiencing that all the time, but there's been periods in my life where things are kind of breaking down a bit, and it's like no matter what I do or what I think about, it's like I can't control that anxious feeling. I've kind of been there in the past. So.
Okay. I had pulled up a couple of questions I wanted us to discuss, and Jonathan already jumped into one already. That next question is anxiety always bad? We kind of touched on that sometimes, and Chaplain Jim as well, that sometimes anxiety is just part of jumping into new things sometimes, or some large responsibility that you feel it's important for you to do well in. All that can trigger anxiety, and it can be a force for doing good. The anxiety sometimes can prompt you to jump in and try to do your best. Sometimes that happened for me in school. I'd procrastinate on a test or a project, and then when I realized the time crunch was there, suddenly that anxiety kicked in enough that it actually prompted me to actually do the work I should have been doing for a week before or 2 weeks before. So sometimes anxiety can help you if you harness it to help you to do the things you need to do. But the challenge is sometimes that we don't always respond that way. One of the questions I came up with was, how can you tell if you're anxious? Anxiety shows itself in multiple ways, perhaps. I think some of you guys have already expressed some of that, the way you're feeling it. Some folks have said anxiety shows up in our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. So let's start with thoughts. What thoughts kind of go along with anxiety? What ones have you identified? Because part of that is not everybody handles it the same, right? So what thoughts come to your mind when you're anxious?
Well, for me, I tend to be pessimistic when I'm anxious. Like, it's like everything I'm worried about, I'm envisioning worst case scenario, and it's just perpetually making the anxiety situation worse. It's like, whatever's wrong in my life. Okay, if this continues, what could make it worse? And I think about that, and and I worry about something that could possibly not happen. It can make the problem worse just by kind of being in that state of, jumping to these conclusions that, more negative things could happen in the future. So.
Sometimes I'm told I overthink things, but yet in the midst of doing that, I'm always looking for what are the possibilities, what are the things that I can do to make this go the right way. But also realizing there are things that could make it go the wrong way and trying to avoid those. So for me, it's more of a process that, okay, I have this situation that I'm uncertain, of what's going to happen, but what can I do in my own ability or in getting resources to be able to work through it? And is it something that's going to take time to work through it? If it's going to take time, then what's the process that I need to put into place? And also working to try to kind of push back any of those negative thoughts, realizing that they will come, and realizing that they can hold me back if I don't look more for the positive things that will help me to get where I need to go and to do the very things that I need to do.
Yeah, very good.
A lot of times I just dwell on a situation. It's like my mind can't process it. It can't put it in the back. It's always there. So that's where anxiety will hit me with thoughts.
Yeah.
Just dwell on it.
Some folks that have reported that anxiety is causing an issue in their life have reported thoughts like excessive worry, obsessive thoughts, jumping to conclusions, mind reading, assuming that you know what the other person is thinking or doing, all or nothing thinking, so it's either great or terrible, just rumination, so just stewing on something over and over, racing thoughts, a worst case scenario, like you talked about. So for instance, that might be if you sent one of your family members a text and you don't get an immediate response back, you think, oh no, they're in an accident, stuff like that. You immediately go to the worst case scenario. Sometimes anxiety in your thoughts can end up just replaying conversations you've had with people over and over and over again. And sometimes it just ends up in kind of a general sense of doom, like you think something bad's going to happen. So folks report that for kind of the thoughts that are fed by anxiety that cause them problems. What about behavior? Have you all run into folks having issues with their behavior because of their anxiety? What does that look like, do you think?
Some kind of act demoralized. They might become aggressive and kind of sometimes they'll say things verbally that aren't so kind, and then other times you find people that really can't find the words to say or the actions to do something, and so it can either become very aggressive or lethargic sometimes.
Okay, yep. Y'all have anything to add on that?
I think one thing I see is then within their actions, they may turn to alcohol.
Okay.
They'll turn to a lot of times synonymously anxiety and depression are together, and so they'll act that way. Maybe have a harder time getting out of bed. Those different things there.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah. You have something you want to add?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it can affect family life too, because there's been times, where I've felt so affected by anxiety that, my kids are trying to get me to do something, or, Jahira's trying to get me to do something, and my mind will only focus on whatever is affecting me with the anxiety. So it's like I'm 25% there for the people around me. So I think it can affect behavior and the way that you interact with others. And just to be clear, this is not something I'm suffering from constantly. It sounds like my life's all doom and gloom and it's full of anxiety. I'm just talking about things that have happened in the past. So just so y'all know.
It might just be the fact he has to deal with his senior pastor, so that might be part of it. So we'll have to look into that, I think. But some folks that have struggled with anxiety report behavioral issues such as a push toward perfectionism, trying to make sure that they're doing everything exactly right to kind of set aside their worry. Sometimes it shows up in people pleasing, trying to please the people around them, make them happy with them, or over functioning, so they keep doing something over and over again. Their focus on performance or pretending to be something. Sometimes they choose to rely on nobody else, so they don't ask for help. They're just focused in on the issue that they're dealing with. They can be demanding, they can be aggressive, they can use addictions to numb themselves from that. They may be irritable or agitated. They may procrastinate things they ought to be doing. They come up with ways to distract themselves from their anxiety. Sometimes they avoid responsibilities. Sometimes they'll disengage from other people or defer to other people, and that shows up in how they act. The third area we talked about is sometimes anxiety can show up in our physical body, in symptoms that show up. You guys run into that or see people that are dealing with physical symptoms from anxiety?
Probably the biggest thing I see is sleep patterns. You know,
Okay.
somebody can't sleep or they sleep too much.
Yep.
That's what I see.
Okay.
Yeah. Either sleeping, or they find it difficult to eat, or all they want to do is eat. So either sleep, eating, or sometimes just your energy levels. Either you're kind of hypervigilant or you're very lethargic. One of the two. You kind of go to those extremes.
The first time that I preached, I used to be deathly scared of public speaking, which I'm still somewhat scared, but I used to be deathly scared of it. And
It's one of the most highest fears is public speaking. So that you're in with a lot of people are with you there.
There you go.
At that point.
I experienced nausea that culminated to the extent that nausea can culminate to. So,
Just to keep
so,
it clean. Right?
yeah. So,
Yeah, and folks that, again, are experiencing anxiety typically report symptoms like a tightness in their chest. They experience shallow breathing. They just kind of like they forget to take deep breaths. They can have digestive issues or nausea. Vomiting can happen, heart racing, sweating. Their muscles feel tense, sleeplessness sometimes, lightheadedness, panic attacks, kind of a jittery or fluttery sensation. It's as though their body is in fight or flight mode. Sometimes it's a reaction to the anxiety around them. They sometimes will. It's like other people don't like me, or my family is in danger. It's kind of that hypervigilant. They're in fight or flight mode. So the question then is, what causes this? Sometimes there are issues that can create anxiety that are real issues. And sometimes folks experience anxiety and don't know why, perhaps. And so some of the challenge might be to say, do you know what is causing your anxiety? And then secondly, maybe even, is there anything you can actually do about it? Because a lot of people stress about things that they have no control over. Other people stress about things they could control. Some people don't know why they're stressing, perhaps. And maybe you all assess that a little more in depth than I just did. What am I missing in that assessment, or what do you think causes anxiety in people?
Well, certainly from what I think Jonathan and I have seen is that a lot of changes. Whenever you go through a tremendous amount of change, whether it's change in where you live, where you sleep, where you eat, what you do, your work, anything like that is going to provide you with some uncertainty, and it's going to provide you with those thoughts of, okay, what needs to be done and how am I going to get through it? And really, we could, to a great extent, equate anxiety and stress together, because the same types of symptoms that you've already outlined are associated with stress. And then there are the demands that others place on us, and then couple that with the demands that we place on ourselves. So, like with the public speaking, there's that sense, I don't want to get up there and stumble over myself, and am I going to do things right? So we demand so much of ourselves. And yet, we tend to think sometimes others are demanding, even though when we have a congregation here that would, very willingly just accept us for who we are and how we present, but we sometimes sense a demand. Parents sense the demand from their children. I got to have this and I got to have it now. And we know you can't have it now. But in our own sense, we would like to be able to provide it. So those changes that we go through and those demands that are on us, the external and internal, really do put a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress on us, where we see these problems or these symptoms manifesting themselves.
Yeah, the first thing you were talking about with the various changes that people see in their life. Some years ago, I went through a little survey that said, your stress level is a lot of times affected by changes in your life. So it says, look down this list and check off the ones that have happened to you in the last year. And things like, moving, a new job, a new relationship, or getting married, or the loss of a family member, or stuff like that. And you go down that list, and suddenly you begin to see, I've had all these changes happen in this last year. It's no wonder that I feel stressed out occasionally. So part of that is just giving yourself grace, I think, if you've been through a very difficult year, and who hasn't with the last few years with COVID, because a lot of things changed, right? And so that adds to the stress level for us all, and in part, give yourself some grace to recognize that's going to affect you. You're going to feel some level of anxiety because of all the stuff you've been through. Any other, you guys want to jump in on the other question as well, of things that cause anxiety?
I think Chaplain Jonathan was talking about it on Sunday, but I think isolation is another leading cause, because now everybody's personality is different, but I'm the kind of person where if I'm worried about a decision, I want to bounce it off of as many people as I can. I want to have a discussion. Hey, I got this going on. What do you think of doing it this way or doing it that way? That helps me alleviate the anxiety of the situation just by sharing what's happening and getting other people's opinion and advice on some possible solutions. So just being able to talk about it with someone is helpful to me. And so when you feel like you're isolated, or you don't have somebody that you can talk to about these things that you're experiencing to help you make with decision making and whatnot, I think it's important to seek out a trusted friend or partner to be able to bounce some thoughts off of when you're in that mindset where you can't control your anxiety.
I think he's giving all of us an advanced hint on one of the tools that are available to help us. And if you look around the room, the people he's talking about are right here, probably. You may know some folks that couldn't be here tonight, in which case you need to invite them to come tomorrow night. But the people that you know provide support and encouragement for you. You wanted to jump in as well?
Yeah, a couple of things. One thing on that point is like, who's mentoring you? Where's your mentors? That's always a big thing, especially if you have professional mentors, or just people who maybe somebody a little bit older who has some wisdom or whatever, could speak into your life. Talking to them once a month, talking to them once a week, those are huge. Two, a lot of anxiety is really, I wouldn't say a lot of anxiety, but some anxiety is we bring it on ourselves. How busy are you? Like this week, we're going to be busy. We'll be here every night, right? But look at a typical week. Sometimes we wear that as a badge of honor of how busy we were. When I first came into the pastorate, it seemed like every time we went to a pastor's conference, somebody was, bragging about, hey, I work 70, 80 hours a week. Now I'm sitting there going, I don't want to work 70, 80 hours a week. That's crazy, right? But we run every night, whether it's soccer practice or baseball or whatever, and we're running our kids ragged, we're running ourselves ragged. Take time, take those little moments, and be able to step back. You'll be amazed at how less anxious you are.
Yeah.
And to add on just a little bit, it is helpful if you can bounce it off of somebody, but sometimes there are those who feel, I don't really have anybody I can. That's where observe others. See if you can see how other people have done it. I'll never forget, Yvonne and I attended a number of John Maxwell conferences. And if you want to hear a great public speaker, John Maxwell is one. He always said that he observed everybody speak publicly that did well. And he actually looked highly at Johnny Carson. He said, here's a guy who he stands up there, doesn't move any place, and yet he captivates an audience and then ends with that golf swing. And yet he has all kinds of followers. And so he looked at him, and he observed him, and he observed other people. And he even said that most public speakers don't come into their own till about 10 years of public speaking. But that stayed in my mind, that sometimes you don't have somebody you can really talk to, or you don't know who, but there's somebody out there, and you might not know them personally. So can you observe them and see how they do something? and that might be an inspiration for you as well.
Yeah. Learning from other people, that ties in with the next thing I was going to say, talking about the causes of anxiety. Coincidentally, and maybe providentially, there was just recently this past week, the Church Mental Health Summit that took place. It was an online event. And one of the folks who was involved in that talked about anxiety many times being caused in people's life by their sensing a threat to love. So they sense that somehow the love that they need in their life is at threat, or perhaps a threat to their sense of identity, who I am, what I'm about. So if who they are, if they feel threatened in who they are, or maybe their worth is threatened, their approval, their value, their belonging, that creates a sense of anxiety to them. Also, if they experience a threat to their safety. So how am I engaging in the world? So obviously the pandemic created a threat to a lot of people's sense of safety. That's one of the reasons that there was such high anxiety. So is your sense of control of your own life at risk? Again, your sense of safety is threatened. Maybe even your security. So that may have kind of the idea of your finances, for instance. Do you have what you need to survive? If that's being threatened, again, that can prompt anxiety. Maybe your ability is being questioned in certain areas of your life. That can certainly create anxiety. We've already talked about stress. Jeff and Jonathan also mentioned just the busyness of life. Sometimes anxiety can be caused because we're distracted from life. And how many of us have to struggle to keep reins on our social media involvement and use? So those are things that may be triggering anxiety in your life, and so to think about that. Now, one of the things we obviously want to do, we've been talking about this for a few minutes already, but I want us to kind of take a turn because we can learn from other people through the experiences of people in Scripture. So I want you guys to kind of jump in with your thoughts on maybe some examples of people in Scripture who experienced anxiety, and maybe what can we learn from that, if you have any highlights. We don't need a sermon, so I'm going to keep mine as a sermonette. So anyone, who wants to jump in?
I think of David, and funnily enough, I had Psalm 51 up here on my computer. Right after, basically Psalm 51 is a cry out of David to God after he comes to the realization that he has made a lot of mistakes with Bathsheba and adultery and murder. And just to keep it short, I'll just say that. And in Psalm 51, just some examples of the things that he's saying. He says, cleanse me of my sin, for I know my transgressions and my sin is always before me. I think that's anxiety there. Everything that he did is at the front of his mind at all time and is causing him to perpetually worry about it. Against you and you only have I sinned and done what's evil in your sight. So you are right in your verdict and justified when you judge. I think David faced a lot of anxiety because after that he also had a lot of family issues that gave him a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of Psalms where David pours out a lot of his anxious thoughts, I think. So he's definitely somebody.
Sure.
I actually think of two people when we talk about that. And I mean, Scripture doesn't say they're anxious, but certainly the things that they experienced would cause anxiety in a lot. And the first one I'll mention is Ruth. As you know the story of Ruth, Ruth was one who, her husband died, her father-in-law died, her brother-in-law died, and now here they are, single women with no one really to help them and support them. And so her mother-in-law said, go back to your people. Basically, she was saying, go back to those who can support you. And Ruth said, no, your God shall be my God and your people shall be my people. So Ruth, as I have often shared in my sermons, she clung to God and God's people is what she did right there from the beginning when that tragedy struck. And then she went ahead and continued on in daily activities because she knew that somebody needed to provide for both her and her mother-in-law. And so where do we see her? We see her out in the fields. So she clung to God, God's people. She persevered in everyday activities. And then she saw that hope when her mother-in-law said, hey, you're in that field. Stay. She took some good advice. stay in that field with Boaz, and then now we see her as the great-grandmother of King David. And then the other person I see is Elijah. You know, here he had this spectacular event where he showed that God was God on the mountaintop, and then turned around, and when he heard that Jezebel was going to kill him, what did he do? He took off. But where did he go? He went to God. He went to the mountain, and he tried to hide there with God. And then finally, after God spoke to him, it was, okay, go out and do what I require you to do. And so he went out and he did what God wanted him to do. So it seems like, to me, Scripture is saying, cling to God and God's people, but then go ahead and persevere in those things that you should be doing. And in that process, God will help get us through.
I'll just note here that next slide, I think, has the reference to the chapter there in 1 Kings, chapter 19, about the story about Elijah. that Chaplain Jim just referred to. I was going to mention that as well. One of the things that you see when he's challenged by Queen Jezebel with, she's basically threatening to cut off his head. Elijah runs away.
Yeah.
He finds a shade tree and says, "I hope to die." So that sounds like, you know, catastrophizing and like I'm done with this, right? However, he falls asleep, and then an angel wakes him up and gives him food. And then he goes back to sleep. He wakes up, angel gives him food again. So one of the things that comes out of that for me is it's probably a good idea to get some rest if you can, because sometimes anxiety can disrupt your rest. Also, eat right, right? Eat some angel food cake. No, that's not what it's. That's not in there. Eat food that an angel would give you, the good stuff, right? And he eats and sleeps regularly there for a couple days, and then he receives strength to continue on. And as Chaplain Jim said, he starts doing the thing that God wants him to do and begins to jump back into life. So, all right, any other passages you want to mention?
Think about Jesus at Gethsemane before he's, you know, about ready to go to the cross. I mean, it says, he goes, I am deeply grieved, even to death, you know, and then later on in his prayer, you know, he's like, finally, he said, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not what I want, but you want, you know, surrendering that. So,
Yeah, sweating drops of blood. That seemed like a really high level of anxiety, more than most of us encounter. So what does that say to you about the resources we have, though? How do we respond in those moments? What does Jesus' example say to you?
about the,
Just responding to anxiety. How did Jesus handle it?
just giving it back to God, really. You know, finally saying, I give this completely over to you, you know.
Yeah, and that reminds us, I think, that if we have given our life to God, then all of the anxiety, all this pressure, all the stuff that's thrown at us, if we don't belong to ourselves anymore, if we belong to God, then all that stuff being thrown at us goes to Him, right? How much of a help is it to know that you don't have to handle all that by yourself? If you belong to God, then He's obligated to take care of what belongs to Him, right?
And He does. It's important for us to know, though, that too often we do follow the advice that Peter gives us to cast all of our anxieties upon God because He cares for us. But in the process of doing that, we've all seen those little paddle balls. It's kind of like throwing it, but bringing it back and paddling it again. And we need to let it go. Give it to God. I mean, certainly it's not that we're going to forget about it or that God isn't going to work with us to get through it. But too often we cast it out there and then try to drag it back and do something on our own by it. And so it's important for us to know that. Just one of the times in our life that was really difficult was when our son, who was 2 years of age at the time, became insulin-dependent diabetic. You know, here's a little child, and we were in the hospital, and guess what time of the year it was? It was Easter time. So I had to go back from the hospital to do Palm Sunday service. Then he didn't come out of the hospital until Good Friday, which I had to run back. We had a Maundy, Thursday service, ran back from there, and then we had an Easter service, both a sunrise and a. So it was a difficult time for us, but we had to really throw it on God because we were in a setting where at that point in time, nobody wanted to watch a little kid who was diabetic. So that meant Yvonne had a lot of stuff on her just to take care of a 2-year-old child and not have anybody to care for her. We relied on God, and certainly from there, that casting on certainly took us through.
Let's jump ahead 2 slides there, Donald, and go to the passage from Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 8 and 9. Let me just read those, and we'll have you guys jump in on that if you have thoughts to share on this. Paul says, "We think you ought to know, dear brothers and sisters, about the trouble we went through in the province of Asia. We were crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability to endure, and we thought we would never live through it. In fact, we expected to die, but as a result, we stopped relying on ourselves and learned to rely only on God, who raises the dead." Thoughts on Paul's anxious moments there and what he learned in the process?
Well, I think it kind of hits the nail on the head. A lot of times we're anxious because we're relying on ourselves. You know, we're thinking, hey, I've got this. I'm not going to let anybody else in. I'm not going to let God have this, but I've got it, and we're failing at that. And it's when we just say, I don't have it. I can control what I can control, but there are things I just can't control. You know, I could drive out of here tonight and get in a car wreck and die. That could happen, but that's up to God, right? I can only control what I can control. I'm going to go to the speed limit. I'm going to, do these things. God, you've got the rest. That's what we've got.
Yep.
And I think what has helped me with anxiety over the years is kind of taking the approach that Paul has here. And I also think of 2 Timothy 1:7, which says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of sound mind." And what I've found personally is that when I'm in the perpetual state of anxiety, I'm trying to reason myself, and I'm not involving God in the process. What I've found is that when I go to God, I get nothing on the fear and anxiety side, and everything from the love and sound mind. Things start to come together and clear up in my mind when I take them to God. So I've found that when I'm on that anxiety train, the only thing that derails it is when I go to God. And he's what provides that sound mind. And God doesn't put in us a spirit of fear. That comes from the world and sin and the enemy, all these things just unraveling in our mind. There's not something that God puts there. It's something that we end up at that God can then fix. So that's.
Yeah, and the hope that's there, because who raised Jesus from the dead, there's hope. We're not people without hope, and sometimes when we dwell with that anxiety, we feel hopeless, and yet that's why I think Paul is saying, focus on the resurrection of Christ. Everything looked like it was against them, and yet what happened? Jesus rose. And that's really what compelled them. They had denied Christ, all of them, but after they saw that resurrection, it's almost like they became fearless. Something changed through that resurrection, and there's where we are people of hope, and we have to keep our eyes on that as well.
I'm going to ask Donald to look ahead for that slide with Philippians chapter 4, verses 4 through 9. There's 2 slides in that series, but I wanted us to kind of, and I will say this, another passage that if you all want to look up and think about on your own. It's actually more than 2 slides in that series, Donald. But another passage that you can look up on your own is 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 6 through 18. That's a great passage to think about as well, where Paul talks about all of the things that he'd struggled. He's pressed but not crushed, challenged but not overwhelmed. Those kind of expressions that show up in that passage. But let's take a look here at Philippians chapter 4, beginning with verse 4. Paul says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Now let me pause right there. Jump back that previous slide there, Donald. I want them to focus on that for just a minute. The words there, Philippians 4, verses 4 through 6. He challenges us to rejoice, and it's sometimes hard to rejoice when you're feeling anxious, right? So this is the challenge to get your mind out of that downward spiral that sometimes happens, and look at things that you can be grateful for, things that bring you joy. And the Lord can bring us joy, right? We ought to start there, but there's many gifts that he's given us that we ought to give him thanks for. And it reminds us, let your gentleness be evident to all. Sometimes when we're stressed out, we aren't gentle to the people around us. So be kind to the people around you, even if you're stressing out. I know it's hard, but he says the Lord is near, which means the Lord is near to help us. If you depend upon him and rest in him, he will help you. And he says, do not be anxious about anything. Now, that's sometimes like saying to somebody who's stressed out, just be calm. Calm down. And it feels like it's advice that's hard to take. But he says, don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation. So instead of just saying, don't feel this way, he gives you something to do. In every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. So in the midst of your anxiety, what do you want God to do for you? Go to him with that request with thanksgiving. So it's challenging you to say, okay, you've got this, you want to ask God for this, but what can you thank him for as well? So I think a lot of times we get so wrapped around the problem that we fail to see there's also positives out there. There's something we can rejoice about. There's something we can give thanks for. All right, let's go on to the next slide there, Donald. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. So when we come to God with our requests, we look for things to rejoice about. We give thanks to God for what he's already done. He says we present our requests to God, then God's peace, which we don't fully understand, it's beyond our ability to comprehend. His peace can guard our hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And just a couple more verses, and you guys be ready to jump in. But here, verse 8, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. So those last two slides, he says, you have a choice what you think about, right? If you think about all the negative stuff, no wonder you're feeling upset and frustrated and anxious. Think about things that are excellent or praiseworthy. And then he said, I'm giving you a good example. Again, looking at people that can walk the path and show you the path. Look and see what others have done, like the Apostle Paul. And the God of peace will be with you. Jump in, guys. What else do you see in those passages?
Well, I just thought of something when you said look to other people. One of the best pieces of advice that Pastor gave me when I was telling him about some of these anxiety issues that I had was that a lot of the cause of anxiety in my past has been I have like 10 things that I'm trying to figure out, and I'm so worried about them that I can't concentrate on one of them. And so Pastor Bill gave me the advice of take one thing at a time and make a list of things that you can do right now to solve that problem. And once you get all those mapped out and you've done everything you can to solve all those problems, you'll probably find that your anxiety will slip. And I think that's extremely helpful. That was extremely helpful advice. Going to you for that was, really helped me in that situation. And I think a combination of that kind of thing and going to God in prayer, because there's going to be things you can't control, and you might get anxiety over those things. And so I think putting it in God's hands, knowing that He's in control, and also knowing that He's the only person that can derail the anxiety train in certain circumstances.
And he loves you too, right? You come to him because he loves you. Yeah.
And a lot of times when we're anxious too, we get kind of overwhelmed in our thoughts. Can I take a time out? Is there if I'm working on my computer, I'm getting overwhelmed by some other thoughts, just taking a quick time out and giving that to God in prayer, like, hey, God, I'm having these thoughts. Please, please take this problem right now and just put it in your hands. Please help me right now, taking those quick timeouts is huge in prayer. Yep.
Yeah, kind of like, where is our focus? Is it on the good or is it on the negative? But also, is it on something too large? Sometimes when you get on a deployment, the first thing you think of is, wow, it's so far before, but you break it up into little pieces. Okay, if I've got this to do till the end of this week. I always remember after I got out of the Marine Corps and got into ministry, and we were at the church in Ontario, I decided to go out running one day. I wanted to keep up, and so I usually ran about anywhere from 2 to 3 miles. Well, I figured I'm going to run 5 miles today. So I get out there and I get to the 2.5 mile mark, and as soon as I turned around, it's like, oh, I'm tired. I don't know if am I going to walk the 2.5 miles? I don't want to walk. So I looked and it's like, I can make it to that telephone pole right there. So I went to that telephone pole, and then it's like, well, I made it to this telephone pole. Let me make it to the next telephone pole. And I just kept doing that until all of a sudden I turned the corner and there's a house down there. It's like, hey, I made it. So sometimes that focus needs to break it up into smaller pieces, because we bite off more than what we can chew, or at least mentally and sometimes physically. So just remember that word focus too. Where is our focus? Is it on the good things? Is it on God? Or is it only on the negative stuff? And have I taken on too much stuff? Can I break it up into smaller pieces that I can manage?
All right. One of the questions, men, might be, how can we give some practical steps to help people move from anxiety toward peace? Any thoughts on practical steps? If you sense you're being overwhelmed by anxiety, what's the next step?
Well, I think you got to name it. What's causing me to be anxious? And really going deep into that, going, okay, is it just because I'm having a quick money problem, or is there something deeper within there? Because once you name it, then you got something you can attack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the identification of it, and then is there something that I can do about this? Is there something I need to learn about this? Because if I can't really do it, is it knowledge that I need to attain so that I can do, or is there a resource or something out there that can help me do this? And so by that naming it and identifying it, then where do I go from here? Do it myself? Certainly we always partner with God, even if we're doing it on our own. But what information do I need? What knowledge do I need to gain? What resources are out there to help me? Those types of things we have to accompany that naming it.
Do we have any people pleasers out here? Yeah, that's me. What I've found is that if I can experience pretty intense anxiety if I think that somebody is not happy with me. And what I've found is that instead of stewing in that for an extended period of time, why don't I just go talk to the person and find out if that's really how they're feeling, or figure out what, why you might perceive that they are upset with you, and solve it, because the tension that you're going to face with the idea of facing that person and talking to them is going to be way less painful than having anxiety for 2 weeks, wondering if they do feel that way about you. I say that because I've made the 2-week decision before. And it took me 2 weeks to finally talk to the person. They weren't even upset at me. So, yeah.
Yeah, and part of that for me is the first step is to figure out, is this an issue that I can do anything about? If you can't do anything about it, then you need to turn it over to the Lord, let it go, recognize it's not up to you to solve that. And you need to focus on something that you do have control over. If you do have some level of control over it, then the question is, what should I do about it? And sometimes that means asking for advice from other people, praying about it, getting the Lord's insight, reading Scripture. Those are all steps that you can take to try to help you see a path forward, and certainly asking the Lord to guide you so that you're doing what is according to His will, and recognizing that if this is a problem that you're facing that you have to deal with, but you belong to God, then you can kind of push the responsibility up the chain of command, right? God, I belong to you, so this is your problem ultimately. And I think Paul kind of did that. He said, I belong to Christ, and in the end, if I die, that's okay, because I'm going to be in his presence. So the worst that the world can throw at me is to kill me. And even if that happens, I'm with Jesus, so it's going to be okay. And so even the worst doesn't bother him, because he recognizes the worst the world can do just gets him closer to Jesus. And so he can relax about some of the stress that he's facing. Yeah.
I was just going to say, too, ask yourself, why does this cause me anxiety? Now, that's not always an easy question to answer, but there is a reason behind it.
Yeah.
Because we've all seen those people that they, and I'll just use the test example, that they walk into a test and they think, hey, this is no big deal. All I need to do is pass the test. And then others are just fretting and they're sweating bullets, and thinking, I got to ace this test. And yet we all go in, that it goes back to what we talked about earlier, demands. But why is that bothering you like it is? Why have you made it that way? It might be for the good, right reasons, but it might be for reasons that are unrealistic as well.
Yeah, some years ago there was a book written entitled "The Lies We Believe." I think Chris Thurman, Minirth Meyer Clinic, I think was the one that published it. But one of the things that highlights is when you go into a situation, ask yourself, what are the assumptions I'm operating under here? If you go into a test and you're anxious, is it because you say, I have to be perfect? Well, is that an accurate assumption? Or is that a lie you've picked up from somebody? Somebody told you need to be perfect, or you're trying to impress somebody, or you're trying to prove to your parents that you're somebody, or that you're going to make something out of yourself. So what are the assumptions that are behind this anxiety? And sometimes those assumptions are lies. They're false. And yet we've accepted them without even thinking about them, and that's creating the anxiety. So go back to what is true about me. I am loved by God. Jesus died to save me. I have a home in heaven because I'm trusting in his salvation. I've got a home in heaven, so what happens to me tomorrow doesn't matter, right? I'm going to make it home to heaven. So just focus on what is true rather than on the things that are false. So return to truth. You're loved, you're valued, and there are some things you can do in life to make choices, to make things better. Some things you don't have control over, and that's okay. You can turn those things over to God. Can you dare to believe that what the scriptures say about you is true, even if you don't feel it? Then choose to speak that truth out loud. Sometimes saying it out loud helps. Sometimes saying out loud the assumptions that are false helps you kind of see how wrong they are. But then ask for help. Listen to other people's ideas. Sometimes trying something different can kind of get you out of that. Take care of yourself. Breathe deeply. Take a walk, and then begin to see how taking those simple steps can move you in the right direction. Somebody once said that when you're facing a challenge, sometimes the analogy they use is like one of those scales, like the scales of justice. You put some weight on one thing and it shifts the other one. It said on one side is stress, on the other side is support. When you have more stress, sometimes you quit focusing on the support, and the support gets light. You get like, you got a test coming up. Okay, I can't go meet with my friends. I can't talk to anybody. I have to, you shut down. There are other parts of your life to focus on this one thing, and then suddenly you feel isolated, cut off, and by yourself. So when the stress begins to hit, make sure you don't give up on the support. In fact, sometimes you need more support in order to keep things on an even keel. Does that make sense? All right, well, we've gone longer than I anticipated. But we're going to shut down the live stream at this point because there may be some folks in the room that have some questions that they may not want it to be public on the internet. And I will say this, on our live stream, you'll see a link in the live stream description, as well as on our website, for a place where you can anonymously leave comments or questions. Looks like we won't have time to deal with that this evening, But we'll try to begin next evening with our any questions that popped up pertaining to the question of anxiety. So at this point, we'll